Coming up on this episode of Discover Health Podcast.
A 15-year-old boy, his name was Lewis Blackman, went in for chest surgery for a defect that he had from birth. And it was supposed to be a pretty straightforward surgery. Surgery went well, but the day after surgery, he starts complaining of abdominal pain. Now, his mother's concerned because she thought that was weird. The pain increases. His vital signs continue to deteriorate. His heart rate went up. His blood pressure went down. Nobody listened. Nobody put together the cues that this patient was exhibiting, and all patients do. In fact, what I told you earlier about the failure to rescue, when patients deteriorate to the point of cardiac arrest in a hospital,
Mhm.
80% of that's preventable. There are signs of deterioration, whether it's increased respiratory rate, weird pain like Lewis's. Those signs happen 6 to 24 hours prior to an unplanned cardiac arrest. So with Lewis, those were over 2 to 3 days that nobody really connected the dots. And so they just ignored these catastrophic signs, and he ended up dying of a perforated ulcer.
Welcome to the Discover Health Podcast, where we explore the power of gut health, nutrition, and lifestyle to help you feel your best every day. I'm Dr. Josh Sharp, your guide on this journey to better digestion, more energy, and overall well-being. Ready to start discovering? Let's hit the trail. Welcome back to another episode of Discover Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joshua Sharp, and joining me today is Dr. Julie Siemers, DNP, and she is a patient safety consultant, a visionary nurse leader, educator, and TEDx speaker with over 4 decades of experience in direct care, education, and executive leadership. She's the founder of LifeBeat Solutions and author of the best-selling book, Surviving Your Hospital Stay, a nurse educator's guide to staying safe and living to tell about it. After more than 30 years inside hospitals, from ICU and emergency departments to trauma helicopter flights, she now equips patients and families with practical tools to prevent harm and stay safe. On today's episode, she's going to share insider strategies to help you speak up, partner with your care team, and navigate hospitalization with confidence instead of fear. Dr. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So the first question I really like to ask is, how did people get into doing what they're doing now? So first of all, how did you get into nursing? And then what made you want to continue your education? And then as a part B question, how did you get into doing what you're doing now in hospital safety and patient safety?
Yeah. So when I was a teenager, my mom always wanted to be a nurse herself. So she said, that's what I should do. And I thought, I think that really fits. So that began my journey right after high school. And as you said, worked at the bedside in different patient care areas for decades. And then went in 2009 over to the university to start teaching nursing students. And I thought, well, I've got enough experience. I should be able to contribute something. But to teach in the classroom, I needed to finish my master's degree. And in that process, I had to pick a thesis, which I then carried over into my doctoral program. But that thesis was with failure to rescue, which
Mm.
is kind of a medical term in the literature, but there's still a lot of providers that don't even know what it is, or nurses that don't what it is. And it's really failing to recognize when a patient becomes unstable in the hospital. And that started 16 years ago into, gosh, almost 17 now, my trajectory into really researching patient harm. Because what shocked me was I'd already been in the industry for three decades, as you said. And I was like, how come I didn't know this? And the more I researched and the more I found it is preventable. I mean, medical mistakes are the third leading cause of death,
Yeah.
which is shocking, right? Right behind heart disease and cancer. But it's something we can do something about. Here's the other thing I found. This has been in the literature in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, in 1955, so 70 years. They stated the most common thing that happens to patients in the hospital is harm. So that obviously enrages me because I'm like, we all have family members that are going to be a patient, if not ourselves one day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My jaw hit the floor a little bit when you just said that. The most common thing that happens to patients in the hospital is harm. That, that's like that's something to sit and think with for just a moment. But to be honest, even in just my short time, 18, well, it's not as short as I think 18, 19 years working in practice. And I'm a chiropractor, so I don't work in hospital settings, but I deal with lots of people that have been to the hospital and family members that have been to the hospital. I do hear a lot of stories. Are there any, like, I'm going to say cautionary tales, but any stories that really get you fired up or something that really motivates you to work even harder in this field that you can share with us?
So many of them. And as you mentioned, my TEDx talk, I talk about 3 stories, and it's not to this isn't to throw healthcare under the bus. It
No.
really is to raise awareness that you have to be an active advocate in your own healthcare and that of your family. So
Hmm.
we can't be passive and just assume that there's not mistakes. And what's funny is when I tell people some of these stories, they will tell me stories of their own and they think it's an isolated incident. They think, "Oh, well, unfortunately, my dad had a wrong site surgery. They took out the wrong kidney." They think that's just a one in a million thing, or they think it's something we just see on TV
Yeah.
because the healthcare industry they're really good at sweeping things under the carpet and hiding things. There's not transparency. There's no federal mandated law that we have to report patient harm. Some states have some, guidelines and regulations around that, but that's why it's kept in the shadows. And I want to bring it out, not to scare people, but to empower them with education.
Mm.
That's well said. First of all, this is not about just demonizing or anything. It's just about you want to be safe and you want to protect your loved ones, protect yourself where you can. And something that I've said for years now is, and it goes along with what you're saying, is you have to be your own advocate. You can't just trust that they are going to do everything exactly the way that it should be done because there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of communication that needs to happen that doesn't always happen exactly as it should. And, sometimes there's staffing shortages. There's so many factors. And so it's always a good idea to try to watch out for yourself, watch out for loved ones. And, honestly, you shouldn't feel guilty about doing that. It should feel like a good thing. And hopefully, in doing it the right way, which I'm excited to learn about some of the advice that you have for us. Doing it the right way, it won't be something that comes off as offensive or something that kind of adds tension to the situation when you're working with the staff. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I didn't give you a story, but I'll tell you one of them that's in the TEDx talk, which is I tell it to every single one of my nursing students because it's so powerful. A 15-year-old boy, his name was Lewis Blackman, went in for chest surgery for a defect that he had from birth. And it was supposed to be a pretty straightforward surgery. Surgery went well, but the day after surgery, he starts complaining of abdominal pain. Now, his mother's concerned because she thought that was weird. The pain increases, his vital signs continue to deteriorate. His heart rate went up, his blood pressure went down. Nobody listened. Nobody put together the cues that this patient was exhibiting, and all patients do. In fact, what I told you earlier about the failure to rescue, when patients deteriorate to the point of cardiac arrest in a hospital, 80% of that's preventable. Here's the other thing there are signs of deterioration, whether it's increased respiratory rate, weird pain like Lewis's. Those signs happen 6 to 24 hours prior to an unplanned cardiac arrest. So with Lewis, those were over 2 to 3 days that nobody really connected the dots because there's a thing in healthcare called bias. He's a 15-year-old boy. He had no other problems or health issues. And so they just ignored these catastrophic signs and he ended up dying of a perforated ulcer. When they did the autopsy, they found 3 liters of blood in his abdomen. So the Toradol or ketorolac, which is an NSAID, the nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory that they were giving him for the supposedly chest pain from the surgery, caused this ulcer. So it really is so important to find your voice and speak up for your family members when you feel something is not right. So one of the first tools I'll share is CUSS. You need to cuss. And those
I've
are
never heard that given as advice. Okay, so this could
it
save your life.
is. And
Cussing. Okay, I
you may have to say it like you're cussing, but it is the 4 words that should be able to get the attention of the healthcare team and alert them. I'm concerned, I'm uncomfortable, I'm scared, and this is a safety issue. So you can say something like, "I'm really scared. My mother doesn't usually act like this. I think something's wrong. Can you please reassess her?" Or, "I'm really uncomfortable with the amount of pain my son is having. It just doesn't seem right. He's already had medication. Something seems off." Or, "I'm really concerned. My husband's heart rate has now been over 100 for the last 2 hours and it's not coming down. So I know that's not right. Can you please reassess him?"
yeah, so I like I like that. Cussing, I'll try to put up a little graphic or something so it sticks with people a little bit better to really help, communicate with the staff. There's something going on and something unusual, and we need help, to figure this out and see what's going on. And you point out that most harm in the hospital is caused by broken systems, not necessarily bad people. Can you help us understand what that means and how patients can still protect themselves within the systems that are in place already there?
Yeah, I think finding your voice and knowing how urgent and important it is for you to speak up is number one. Systems errors, I'll give you the example. I don't know if you remember hearing a couple years ago about the nurse at Vanderbilt Hospital who was in working in the radiology department. She had a patient come in for a CAT scan that had fallen at home and bumped her head. She was like 72. Did you remember this story?
No, huh?
Okay. So the nurse pulled out a medication that was supposed to be for anti-anxiety because the patient shared, "I'm claustrophobic. If I go in that CAT scanner, I don't know if I can hold still." So
Hmm.
she got the order for a medication called Versed, which is the relaxing medication. Well, from the automatic dispensing cabinet, she just put in the first 2 letters, VE, to get the medication, but what came out of the dispensing was a paralyzing agent called vecuronium. Not realizing what she was doing and disregarding the warning signs on the machine, she gave this medication to the patient, put them in the CAT scanner. She was in there for 30 minutes getting all the exams. When they pulled her out of the machine, they found her dead. They did try to revive her, but unfortunately, she'd been anoxic without oxygen for so long, she had brain damage. And a couple days later, they took her off life support. So, when they do the root cause analysis exam to find out what happened, she was new to this area. This nurse had never worked radiology before. She was also orienting another nurse, which is distracting, right?
Hmm.
The automatic dispensing cabinets had issues throughout the hospital, and the nurses learned to do a workaround and what they call an override. So when the messages come up, they just hit override, which ignores the message, which so they were trained into this systems error itself. Another thing that came up was there was no policy in the hospital for monitoring a patient that hadn't been given Versed. Now, Versed can be quite strong. It reacts different on different people, but it impacts your blood pressure, can impact your definitely your respiratory rate by depressing it. Not as much as an opioid, but still enough. So if the hospital would have had a policy that anybody gets this medication needs to be on a monitor, then they would have noticed when her heart rate dropped, when her oxygen dropped, and could have saved her. So that's a combination of errors that we call systems errors. But like
Hmm.
I said earlier, when we're not transparent with mistakes, nobody's going to learn about this. So a hospital, if this was in Nashville, Tennessee, and a hospital in Kentucky or Washington State, isn't going to say, "Oh, wow, do we have a policy for Versed? Do we have a problem that our nurses override a machine?" So that's an example.
Real quick, if you're a mom and you've been dealing with Lyme, chronic fatigue, or chronic illness, and you feel like you've tried everything, but nothing sticks, I want to personally invite you to join me and Ginger for a free live webinar called Why You're Still Stuck and How to Finally Heal. Every other Wednesday at noon Eastern, I'm walking you through the same terrain-based process that helped my wife Ginger go from homeschooling on the floor to traveling, exercising, and thriving again. If you're tired of chasing symptoms and you're ready for real answers, this training is for you. Just look for the registration link below this episode in the podcast description. Sign up and I'll see you live on Wednesday. Yeah, that's it's a sad example, but that stuff, unfortunately, it's not super rare. It's more common than you realize. And as you pointed out, so much of it is underreporting. We don't know what's happened. Honestly, you have to know the people that experienced it or their families in order to get the story, just because those things aren't reported like they should be. So how can people protect themselves, within those systems? What are things that they can do beforehand to try to, protect themselves from some of the possible faulty systems that are out there?
The very first thing I would do for anyone listening, I don't care where you live in the US, put in your zip code on a website called hospitalsafetygrade.org, and you will see all the hospitals in your area and how they're rated A through F, just like college or high school grades. And then there are 32 categories of harm or measurement of patient safety. So, for example, in the surgical category, there's blood clots after surgery, respiratory difficulties after surgery, there's infection rates, there's communication between doctors and leaders and nurses in the hospital. And you can see each of those areas red, yellow, green. And the combination of those 32 measurements adds up to an A or a B, C, D, or F. So the data will show that if you go to a D or F rated hospital, you have a 91% chance higher of harm or death. So that's the first thing I would do is research your hospitals.
Yeah.
The second thing I would do is research your own issue, whether it's hip, surgery replacement you're going to have, if it's, and we're so blessed and lucky that we have research tools, but I recommend using the sites that are like Mayo Clinic, like Medline Plus, that are reputable sites. So WebMD. So you're not going to get these, you know, bogus or erroneous answers, but just get informed about your disease process. My brother called me last night and he goes, "Hey, I was just told I've got some kidney disease going on." I'm like, "What?" So I said, "What's your lab work? Let's look at that. What's your blood pressure been?" Apparently, he'd been taking some NSAIDs. He took Advil for months, but this was years ago, and it ended up, harming his kidneys. So it really is just being educated. So I do a lot of social media on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, and that's all I do is deliver, here's what happened, whether it be a lawsuit, just so people can learn, or this is a situation, a woman got sent home with chest pain because it didn't fit what a man usually experiences, like crushing chest pain and shortness of breath, because women present different. All the studies were done in the 60s were from men. That was the research. And so um, this woman who spoke up, she said, "I've read some research and women don't present the same. Can we please get an EKG on my mom before you send her home?" Yeah. So it's just asking those questions. And I know a lot of people are frightened or a little intimidated. Hey, that doctor went to med school for 12 years, or that nurse went to 4 or 6 or 8 years. I don't know anything, but you do, you know?
You do. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, not that the doctor doesn't care. He for sure does, but it's your body, it's your life or your loved one's life. And so it's a different level, right? And this, just like things become mundane and you can make mistakes in just going through your daily life, you walk out to your car and you realize, oh, I didn't grab my keys this time. I do this every single day. Why didn't I get my keys this time? That happens, unfortunately, at all the levels, at every single level, even when it comes to surgery. And so you're not wrong to ask questions and you're not wrong to want to advocate for yourself. And I
Yeah,
think this, Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry. I just did a post a couple nights ago about a 56-year-old that went to an eye center in Denver to have cataract surgery. Probably the most common, easiest, risk-free, but no surgery is ever risk-free. What they found out, and he died, but what they found out is that the OR team, the anesthesiologist and the surgeon and the personnel that were in there were playing a music bingo game, and they did this very frequently. They would blast the music and try to identify a song that starts with a B or an I, NGO, and they turned down his monitor alarms and didn't notice him deteriorating.
Oh my goodness.
So, my recommendation is to ask before any surgery, simple or complex, who will be watching the monitors, who's actually doing the surgery. Are you going to have the alarms on? I know this sounds insane, but maybe that would have flagged them to say, oh, I guess we better pay attention,
Yeah, this person actually doesn't want to die. So maybe
right?
maybe we should pay attention.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I've had several patients have, nerve damage and things just from cataract surgery. And most of the time it is simple, it is straightforward, but as you pointed out, there is no surgery without risk, even something like that. And I think this brings us perfectly to the next question is many families are afraid of, quote unquote, being difficult if they speak up. So you're kind of going right there anyway, but how can they ask these critical questions and advocate strongly without being dismissed by the staff?
The best you can do is I call it the three P's. Be present. And that I also mean not just with your body, but with your heart. Assume the best, assume good intent. Because most healthcare providers do want, as you said, to make sure we help patients and not harm them, but be polite and then also be persistent. So there is a chain of command in the hospital. There's the bedside nurse, the charge nurse, the house supervisor, who's over all of the nursing in the hospital. There's a chief of medical staff. There's also a hospital administrator on call, even nights and weekends. So you have to escalate up the chain of command if you are still concerned that, hey, my nurse didn't take me seriously, something's wrong with my mom. Then you just have to escalate. The whole theme of my TEDx talk was to try to build a bridge between healthcare providers and patients and their families. The We as healthcare providers really need to listen and pay attention. And patients and families need to learn to speak up. And so it's a two-way street, but we have to change the culture. And I think the more we speak up, the more of us who learn what to say, how to say it, what questions to ask, what's appropriate, what should I expect, which is why I wrote the book and then, do these social media. And I have an app for patients and families, like what's normal, what's not normal. Because again, you don't know anything, right? The most lay people just don't.
Absolutely. I think that is unfortunately the mentality. And I think for so long, and it's not as bad as it used to be, but I think so often there was this aspect of hierarchy. Oh, well, he's, this higher level, an authority figure. I have to submit or I have to go along with, whatever these health people say. And so they weren't asking questions. And now, thankfully we have resources. We have people like you that can help us find a voice for our loved ones, for ourselves when it comes to hospital care, when it comes to, significant life altering surgeries and things of that nature. And so I'm very thankful for your work and the stuff that you do. Tell me a little bit. I know that you're working and you have some things there for people, some resources for people to help them find their voice. Can you tell me a little bit about those things that you're working on and some of the things that you have available already for people?
Yeah, I've got on my website, I've got the Safeguard Health app where you can go and find some things. I've got lots of, I think maybe 9 ebooks, one's on surgery, one's on vital signs, etc. I write blogs pretty much all the time. They're on my website as well. The social media really is places where you can learn things too, and the book. But it really is about just becoming, number one, aware, and then becoming informed, and then take it a step further and get educated. And we have to get over the fear of second guessing the doctor because unfortunately there has been, I think I wrote about this 6 months ago, a doctor in Montana was found to have falsely diagnosed patients with cancer. Yeah, I know, it was jaw-dropping to me too, and gave them unnecessary chemotherapy, and he was making millions of dollars on this fraud. But again, ask for a second opinion. Just double check. Hey, can I see my lab results? Can I see my biopsy results? Because if you don't and you assume, the other part of this is getting your results because you don't want that to fall through the cracks. And one of the stories in my book is about a man who had a severe headache, found out he had a tumor, went in to take out the tumor in surgery, and when they finished, they came out and told his wife, and then they told him when he woke up, it looked benign, don't worry. So they didn't. But it wasn't benign. It wasn't benign. 10 days later, the pathology report said it was cancerous. It was misfiled. So nobody found out about it until 6 months later when his headaches are returning and the tumor is back. And they were like, oops, we goofed. So don't assume that just because your doctor doesn't call you and tell you everything's okay or it's not, we've got patient portal now. We can look up things but just find out whether it's lab work or not. Like my brother last night, he sent me his labs and I'm like, "Oh wow, what happened to your potassium and your creatinine?" And he didn't have the results last night. And I said, "Well, you need to get those from your doctor so we can look at this and are they really calling this end stage kidney disease or is there something else going on?" Because he only talked to the medical assistant. I'm like, that's not good enough.
Yeah. And another question that's coming up for me as you're talking this through, have you ever seen patients when they ask for their blood work or copies of test results and things like that? Have you ever heard of doctors not wanting to provide that information or, you know, trying to push that aside like that's a wrong thing to ask for? And if that were to happen to somebody, what advice would you have for that person that's been through something like that?
It's actually one of the patient's in the Bill of Rights for a patient. So call your insurance company, just make phone calls, go to the hospital itself. It's against the law to keep your information from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that people need to realize is they can't say no. They may try to say no. They may, try to put up a front or make you feel bad for asking, but yeah, they have to say yes, and they should want to provide that information. If not, then there's ways you could get it, if you really
Yeah.
wanted to. Um,
I always think if they're trying to deny you, there's something to hide. Why would they deny
uh
you?
Yeah, why would they do that? I've had patients in the past go through things like that, and I always found that was a little disturbing. That wait, why wouldn't they want to give that to you? What are they hiding? So thank you so much for joining us. I mean, have opened my eyes to some things, and you've really, I think, provided such a lot of value and information for people. We've talked about, like, if you're going into the hospital, if you have procedures, if you have these things, but things come up where people are in emergencies. There's accidents that happen. There's hospital stays that are never expected. You never are expecting that. What things should people be doing now before the bad thing happens? How could they prepare themselves even now before going into the hospital to kind of, I don't want to say be ready, but be a little prepared?
Well, protecting your health is the best thing you can do. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you can start now. In fact, I keep mentioning my brother, but he told me last night that his blood sugars in the fall were like out of this world and he had no idea. And so he quit eating how he was eating and now he's improved. So it really is about managing your health. And I say lifestyle is everything. I always tell my nursing students the patients we take care of in the hospital, I believe there's probably research out there, but 95% of all those diseases are lifestyle related, whether it's diet or exercise. And so the best thing you can do is stay out of the hospital 100% if you can.
Mhm.
But then the other one is just, if you get taken to a hospital that because it's an emergency and you're with your mom, for example, and you're sitting at the bedside and you look up that website and you find this, they have a really high infection rates at the hospital your mom's at. The first thing you should do is everyone coming in the room, wash their hands. You would be so surprised at how many healthcare providers don't. But that's one of the first things nurses and doctors learn is preventing the spread of infection. But here's the thing. This is the latest statistics. 1 in 31 patients in the hospital have a healthcare acquired infection. So if that hospital, I would still do it no matter where I'm at. If the doctor comes in or a phlebotomist to draw blood or whoever, the nurse comes over to assess your mom, talk to your mom, whatever. Can you please wash your hands before you touch my mother, my wife, my daughter? Because, they may look at you like, fine. In fact, I did that with a dermatologist and he goes, I just washed him in the other room. I go, sir, I would really appreciate you're going to do a biopsy on me. I want to see that you wash your hands. He even said, I'm putting on gloves, like sterile gloves, like he didn't need it. I'm like, that doesn't preclude you from needing to wash your hands, please. So, you can do it politely, but be
Yeah,
insistent. They'll get
right.
used to it.
They'll get used to it. Yeah, because unfortunately, the consequences could be dire. It could be very serious. Where could people learn more about you and more about your work, and where could they access some of the guides and some of the helper resources that you have for them?
Yeah, on my website. So that's drjuliesiemers.com. And then my social media is the same, drjuliesiemers. So yeah, tons of helpful tools. That's my mission, keep people safe.
I love the work that you're doing. I'm so thankful for people like you that are working hard to protect people from bad things, even in places where they're supposed to be getting healing and getting help. Bad things
Yeah.
happen. And so thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for shining a light in one of those dark corners that often gets swept, things get swept under
Yeah.
the rug. And so thank you for the stuff that you're doing. I will put a link to all of Julie's website, her resources, and her social media links below this episode. If you're listening to the audio, it's going to be in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be in the description there below this video. Dr. Julie, thank you again so much for joining us today. Do you have any, parting words or any advice that you could give to our listeners before we end here?
My pleasure to be here. Like I said, this is just my mission. If I can save one life, which I know I already have, then I feel fulfilled. But I would say, again, hopeful. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I just gave up, right? But I do believe there's hope. I do believe we can start a wave of connection and building that bridge with the healthcare providers. But that just takes every one of us, the individual, to number one, care, be aware, and then, start your journey and just learning a little bit here and there and doing your research. And don't get intimidated. There'll be nurses that say, why are you asking me that? Or, because maybe they don't know the answer. And so sometimes they ignore you or brush you off, medical gaslight you because they don't know. Or they may be busy. Like you said, the workload on nurses today is insane. They're running between rooms, hanging blood in one room and giving antibiotics in another room. And now they've got a new admission from the ER or whatever. It's a little nutty. So a little compassion also, and just assume good intent. But I think we can change the trajectory when everybody gets involved, and just demands better communication. In fact, we didn't mention this, but 70% of patient harm events are due to communication breakdown,
Yeah,
whether that's between the doctor and the nurse, two doctors, the patient and the nurse, or whatever. It's, a lot of components there. But we just have to even say what we already said once before. We have to say it again. If we said something to the nurse yesterday, hey, my mom got dizzy when she got up to walk to the bathroom, and we don't say it today, that may make the difference because they don't always pass forth what we think are the pertinent things, right?
absolutely. Thank you so much for your wisdom and thank you for the work that you do. And hopefully we can catch up sometime in the future.
I'd love that. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for tuning in to the Discover Health podcast. Remember, your health is a journey, not a destination. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next week.